From the vibrant streets of Brooklyn to the prestigious stage of Carnegie Hall, today's guest on Music from Humans is a true maestro of melody and motion. Join us as we explore the multifaceted world of Christopher North, a composer whose notes have colored the realms of film, concert halls, and beyond. Christopher North, a Texan by birth but a New Yorker by choice, has been shaping soundscape since his arrival in New York City in 1997. With a repertoire that spans over 60 films and 20 genre-crossing albums, his musical genius doesn't just echo through the halls of Carnegie, it resonates around the world. A composer, songwriter, conductor, and multi-instrumentalist, Christopher's a chameleon musician that's just as comfortable at CBGB's as he is performing The Lion King on Broadway. Chris gives back to the music community by teaching the next generation of composers and songwriters at Berklee College of Music. A Grammy nominee known for his eclectic albums and profound film scores, Christopher's recent work for Max Roach, the Drum Also Waltzes, not only aired on PBS American Masters, but also clinched the Best Music Documentary at the 2023 IDA Documentary Award. But what compels a man who's played with legends like Quincy Jones and Rosanne Cash to find solace in the wilderness of Alaska? Inspiring compositions that speak of glaciers and the silence of snow. Today, Christopher North opens up about his journey, his inspirations, and his personal moments that shape the music he crafts.
Christopher, so glad that you could come in and talk to me. I think of all the composers that I could talk to or know, you would be the one that I have known the longest.
That is an amazing distinction.
Yes.
And our paths have crossed in many different ways over the years too. So
very, very much so. And we go all the way back to our college days. You moved off to New York, started your great career as a film composer and eventually a teacher as well. And of course, you're still doing concert music. Just an amazing career that you've had so far up in New York. I wanted to talk about your city work. You're quite the film composer and television documentary composer. You recently wrote music for an incredible documentary on PBS on Max Roach. I loved it. I thought it was a great documentary to begin with, but I also was just amazed with the music. I was talking with some other friends and how your music in there fits so seamlessly with the actual Max Roach cut. I know she had a lot of you have a lot of pieces in there. They're all short. And I can imagine that even though they're short, they've taken a lot of time to produce and make and to do. I'd really love to hear, how you do this type of thing.
Well, first of all, yeah, thanks much. I'm glad you watched it. Glad you liked it. It's really rewarding to just know the people that have seen that. It's kind of amazing. I'm going to be starting up collaboration number 4 with Sam Pollard coming up. And Sam Pollard, of course, is the multi-award-winning filmmaker and editor, primarily known previous for his editing work with Spike Lee, but is a kind of a preeminent filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, but especially with the Black American experience. And having had worked with Sam on Two Trains Running, which was, of course, nominated for a Grammy and a similar role. Okay. This particular Max Roach film, of course, was with Ben Shapiro, the collaborator, worked with Sam and Ben. And in some projects, there's of course art and craftsmanship and all of it. But ultimately, a film to be good, if I do my job well, people don't notice me. They just know it's a good movie. And that's really the goal, which is a really interesting kind of thing to think about. Well, I'll say one other thing, which is to say that one of the things I lean into in my life is the fact that I like being a chameleon. I have no issue at all with, I think, that's probably one of the things that drew me to John Williams in the first place, is the fact that he can still be a chameleon and sound like himself, and that's always been my aim. I do not, and I'm very aware of, left to my own devices, the amount of personality that can come through a piece, and whether that's on my own albums or my own projects, and that from time to time I may need to dial that personality down depending on what the collaboration was, whether that's music for dance or plays or whatever I've done. And I actually enjoy the puzzle part of that. My mom is an actress, and I did a lot of acting as a kid, and so to have that part of it also be part of my background of when you first get hired for a film, there's a lot to figure out. Do they want me as uh, part of the filmmaking team, which is actually something that's a little more amorphous to figure out. But sometimes that means I'm there at the script stage and I'm seeing, having ideas about how we're going to achieve the overall sound of the music built into the score before, built into the script, built into the whole overall approach before even a single shot is done. Other times I'm definitely the tail end of the post-production where it feels like there's this other element that needs to be added to the film. And that might be to glue the whole things together. Sometimes that's for me as an auteur or another whole artist coming on the film as literally like another whole character of the film. I am another character. And that's something where I can really pull into, the more stranger music that I've written as a composer for chamber music or concert music, as well as a multi-instrumentalist that improvises. And so, but any kind of a film, you got to kind of figure out even working with the same filmmaker, different films would require a different approach, right? And so it's very clear from this one that, yes, I could have played bass on it, but I decided that no, that would not be the best decision in this case, And I knew that I needed to record the jazz in such a way to be able to produce it such that it sat next to all this other stuff. And, and one challenging bit that I kind of talked about, I realized that a lot of my jazz language that I've written in tends to lean a little bit more towards monk rather than a monk bop approach, and in terms of some quirky, more angular things, rather than slightly more blues informed stuff that needed to be for the Clifford Brown, Max Roach approach. And so it took me a while to figure out that. And so that's just like, how well do I know myself versus what the job's at hand? And how do I also just make it work? So for Max Roach, of course, there was, I needed to have a whole bunch of shorter pieces of music that were very important. And that's one of the things that's interesting is, which may circle back to some other stuff we could talk about today, which is to say, this idea of microculture, and that we have micro ways of receiving culture and pathways, and that we're and even micro art forms. I'm really interested in the notion of micro songs and micro symphonies and all of the stuff like that. So having done music for commercials, you start to look at all the things that can happen in a 30-second. And yet relative to that art form, it's super important. Everything is important, and it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so rather than, the initial, kind of point of view that someone who has not done this kind of work might have, which is, it's just short music. It's just interstitial. It's underscore. It's interstitial. It's like, well, no, you have to nail it within a degree that is so that you would not have any idea of how all the things you have to nail to get it, And in this particular case, you've got, jazz quintet pieces that need to have a perform a certain function, and an underscoring and a source music approach all at the same time. How do I get from here to there? And I need to produce it in a way that acknowledges the time frame, what we just saw versus what we're about ready to see, right? And so, of course, I had a jazz quintet as well as a percussion ensemble approach too. And that acknowledged the M-boom type ensemble that Max Roach, of course, did in the 70s and beyond. That'll probably go on to be part of my film scoring secret weapons. So every time you do a film, you get to learn about some other kind of orchestration or compositional approach or whatever. That is just a really cool ensemble. What percussion ensemble that's not your typical academic percussion ensemble, but it's in fact more of a open instrumentation and allows for improvisation within the set parts and what to do about that. However, all this stuff has to work to picture. Oh, and by the way, you need to record it in a way such that if we need stems and can remove something to make it work better to picture after the fact, we still need to do that, So I got, a whole version of the film with highlighted scenes that they needed some music from. And some of that, of course, is related to intellectual property and what they had rights to. which is to say they had the compositions, but they might not have the recordings. So this Max Roach was on several different recordings and played different things, and there's one eventual thing that they did get the rights to, but it was a very strange thing for me, on the day that Questlove Amir won an Oscar for Summer of Soul. I'm working on an underscoring scene where he's talking about the Drum Also Waltzes the piece, and they're playing like a Thelonious Monk tune and M boom, and I'm trying to have something that hits all those things underneath it, which is just very an amazing opportunity. And there's lots of ways to fail. So even though it's a short piece of music, you got to try a lot of things to like figure out what is it that's going to, and it's just an honor. I mean, to have my history tied to this important doc that may go on to be the definitive Max Roach documentary is just an amazing honor. So felt all that.
Yeah, I can imagine it being really difficult to like, all right, I need to have this feeling of a really cooking jazz piece leading out of like, and I remember some of your shorts are like this, leading out of the head and going into the solos. But I don't need to write an 8-minute jazz piece. I need 1 minute, and I've got to make all this happen in 1 minute. And because it isn't, you're not pulling a 7-minute jazz piece and cutting it. You're literally just writing that, and that's got to be incredibly hard. At least to me, it would be. And I'm assuming, your experience and everything you have, it just makes you built for this, right? Because you have done it all. You've had rock bands and recorded in that style. You went to the big jazz school at UNT. You've done the jazz. You've done the classical. You have this huge range of different musical experiences. All your performances in New York. You mentioned musicals, and having that wealth of that allows you to be this chameleon that you are, and to be able to do all these different projects very seamlessly. I personally don't think I'd be great at doing a film score unless it was something that matched my style, like Clugiano or something.
Yeah.
He did one or two, but it was because they wanted his particular sound. I'd probably fail if you're like, oh, I need you to write a rock song or a rap song. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to fail on that. So
it's really, and it is one musical pathway that tends to, I should backtrack by saying one thing, which is that, you're the likelihood that you have a film composer that is of note before 30 is very rare, because they need to know music really well. They need to know collaborating really well, and they need to know film pretty well, or at least really well, And so, and for me, I spent most of my 20s doing music for dance because I didn't know any filmmakers. Knowing what I know now, I was actually developing my film scoring language with dance, doing music for dance. I just didn't know any filmmakers. So, and being in Dallas, that was the main visual way to express myself and to collaborate that way. But, and so it is a career that kind of rewards all of that wealth of stuff. And God willing, I'll be scoring films and still conducting and still playing and all those things for another several decades, which may or may not be related to some of my activities out in nature, which is to say, how do I keep my health going to be able to back that up? And I think, conducting for me was kind of one of the later pieces of that puzzle, to be able to sculpt a whole performance, not from a technical point of view of what I could do in the DAW after the fact, but actually, the actual performance to picture. And so in some of the cases with Max and Max Roach Doc and other things, in one cue in particular, I was able to bring up we did have the technical facility at Bunker Studios here in Brooklyn to have the screen up, right? And piano player, this is what you're trying to match. There's one kind of cue that really is a special one, just in terms of the kind of praise I've gotten from Sam, which has been amazing. So, of just the technical challenges of how do you take a shot of Max Roach's hands and yet make it work as a source cue, look like what he played, look how he played, and then make it also work as a sum up for the whole film. So it's working as an implied source cue after the fact sync of hands to playing a song that they didn't have the rights to, and having it act as a sum up to the film. And it was just a wonderful puzzle,
Yeah.
And how do you do that notationally, and then communicate that to even a well-intended musician may still look at that and go, "Huh, that's interesting. That's weird," and they're going to do it. But you, as the person, kind of being able to direct them, how do you communicate that?
Right.
And get it done on time and on budget. Which is the other.
Yeah, that's always a big time crunch, right?
Right.
In my understanding, I was just curious too. Do you know how many minutes of music you had to write for that piece?
I think it's only like about 13 minutes. It's about 13
Okay.
minutes. Some of them
And
are.
how long did that 13 minutes actually take you to write?
It was. I have to probably think back about the back. At one point Sam had mentioned, "Hey, there's this thing I'm thinking about using you for." Then there was a particular film screening. It was really great because it was a film screening for another film, and he saw me across the room and I got this thing, and then was still a little while longer before it happened. You know what I mean?
Well,
But I'd already started thinking about it, and similar to the next one that we're working on, which is, I won't really mention, but I want you to start thinking about this thing. It's like, okay. So it was always part of that ongoing, just solving the historical aspect of nailing it, and just start, and that's all research stuff, which I could just, that's,
right,
I would
yeah.
be only happy.
That takes a while.
Sometimes I'd be only happy doing that part of it. So I think there was a couple initial conversations between the time of actually getting the actual film and then the actual starting of demos. It was probably about 2 or 3 months. And initially there was a big kind of rush towards the possibility of the film being out in fall of 2022. So I think I was working on it in the spring of 22, and the final thing was supposed to be done in like 2 or 3 months, right? And then something happened and it got pushed to fall of 23, And I think that may have had to do with the fact that it was the American Masters PBS situation, and the whether it was going to be broadcast or streamed or whatever, and they're working out that kind of a thing, and whatever else they had on their slate for American Masters, plus the fact that just Sam is really, really busy. I'll say one thing about him, which is that earlier on when I first started working with Sam, I made the mistake of saying, "Hey, have you heard of this thing? Or have you heard of this thing?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm working on that. I'm working on that." I'm like, and after like the third time, I was like, "Okay, I can
start asking him, "Are you working on these?"
I can look it up on IMDb Pro, or I can just assume that if there's something really cool, he probably has either worked on it or was asked to work on it, or is a supervising editor, or is a co-producer, or whatever, because he really, specifically with the civil rights and Black American music experience, Black American experience, plus anything that ties in music, and particularly Black musicians, he's going to be on that. So that's pretty much the way that goes. So
cool.
So it was a couple of months, and there's usually 1 or 2 cues that you always feel a little hesitant to tell filmmakers this, but generally there's 1 or 2 cues that always just a little bit longer to get it right, and sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, and some of that is even how much notes via email versus knocking out in the same room. So one of the things I talk about is the inevitability of a same room experience. So, whether it's prior COVID or even during COVID and even post COVID, there's still so much, as we're interacting in this way, there's so much that can be done via Zoom, and so much can be done with shared screens. But inevitably on a film, there's just so much little minutia that's important, that the simple fact of it being minutia and the words take time, and yet there can be more confusion with more words and more emails. It's like, look, let's get together and knock this out in like 2 hours. Like, I'll knock them all out, And I've had that experience, but it always sometimes takes a little bit. So I think there was 1 or 2 cues that took that, and kind of one that was kind of a reapproach situation, and kind of a solving it after the fact. I'll say one other thing about that, which is that one of the different hats that I was wearing earlier in my film scoring career that I didn't know was another whole thing was music editing, which is to say, music editing is a really important role in all films, and particularly in studio films, is going to be the one that's literally there on the sound stage, dropping in these pieces of music, making sure they know which takes we got, making sure that we have all the reconforms of synchronization, and maybe even doing that. But more importantly, they may be the person on bigger films where the composer has already gone on to the next film or even next films, and that music editor is the one that's doing creative solutions to the materials they've got based on the picture changing, right? And so that can be a person that's with the composer or with the studio, depending on the situation. But I realize now that I had been doing music editing a long time, but I didn't know to call it that, which is to say that I've recorded all this stuff. There's this thing that changed. It's going to be too expensive to go back to that recording studio again. How can I fashion what I've got and reconform it and use it in creative ways? And so there was one particular cue where there was some refashioning and re-editing and reuse, as well as a little bit of re-recording based on just another cue needing some revisions. So it was a music, and it was literally like film composer hat is off, music editing hat is on, solve the problem, we're good, rather than being difficult and asking for more money to record. It's like, no, that's not going to happen. Just figure it out.
Yeah.
Big boy pants, let's go. So.
Very cool. Very interesting. Film composing is definitely what a lot of composers strive for these days. But for me, it's still a bit of a mystery since it's not something that I've done. So it's very interesting to learn more about that. And I've always perceived that while there may be, as for example, only 13 minutes of music you work, but that it's going to be really hard to knock out that 13 minutes of music.
Yeah, because even if it's like 14 cues and some of them are only 20 seconds long, you're still talking about a chart, you're still talking about recording, you're still talking about producing, you're still talking about revisions, you're still talking about all that stuff. And that's just a point of entry, and yet, it's totally possible to write perfectly awesome music that just doesn't work for that one little thing,
Yeah.
And so that's also kind of a contractual thing, just in terms of owning your rejected music. There's a really great book called Torn Music. I think it's all about rejected music and fame. As a film composer, you're always aware that somebody else wants your job, and that anybody can hire the last. And yet, it really does depend on those relationships and that trust. And yet, there can be different approaches to how a director works on different projects based on lots of things. One of the things I like to talk about is, are we scoring this in kind of a film way, which is that we've got a whole 2-hour or whatever it is experience, and there can be ways to glue disparate scenes together because of the way that music. And yet, the only way to really know that is to watch the whole darn film. And yet, it's really easy to get myopic and only watch one scene and only score to that little scene. Okay, now let's go on to another scene over here and only watch that, And to me, that sometimes can kind of approach it like scoring a TV show, where old school TV, like network TV, like we're scoring this in a way such that it gets people attention and makes them stay on the channel, right? As opposed to other kinds of TV, more episodic TV that has a longer arc, whereby if you turn it on one moment, it might not be that interesting based on payoffs that happen before and after and stuff like that. So there's always this notion of like sonic glue, of how do I glue things together? And that's part of my job too, which is just this notion of I can be thematic glue, I can be sound glue, I can also, on documentaries, you've got a scene that's got not great sound, but we need a way to bridge that source feeling, meaning there might be some dialogue that has a lot of noise in the background, yet we got to go to a scene that has no noise. It's recorded voiceover. And even though that's a little bit more part of the sound mix, music can help facilitate that flow and how the music starts and stops, which is why even on Max Roach, you might have to have like one cue that starts off one way and then actually ends another way. So you're acting as the bridge between the two things. and then do you make a cut right on another whole thing? I'll say one other thing, which was there's a pivotal scene where Max is talking about his students, and I realized, well, first of all, I probably want to be in the control room for this one, and I don't want to play bass on it and try and do the whole thing. So, maybe, I have this one former bass student that's like a jazz phenom, like already won the BMI Jazz Award and all this stuff like that, and can play circles around me. It's like, let me see about Cole Davis, I think he was 22 at the time, or he's probably 25 now. Any rate, I taught him via the 92nd Street Y, going way, way back. He was a scholarship student, and I think he remembers me more electric bass, but I taught him both electric and acoustic. So, but the point is, he's an amazing acoustic jazz bass player now. Patreon and all kinds of views and stuff like that, and his own stuff. And so I hired him to play bass on this, and also to contract it and put together a band. And that was the session, and that was at least all the jazz quintet stuff, as well as some of the little pieces that were duos and trios and solos from that quintet. And that was pretty much done in one big day, with all the charts and the whole, and you want to make sure you grab some extra stuff just in case. And the rest of it was done a little bit more remotely, which is a longer story. But
yeah. So. Well, I think too, one of the cool things you have up on your site where you demo this is you've got like your synthesizer version or your demo version, where you're selling the concept to the film producers, and then the actual recording of it. I think that for people who are interested in this stuff, that's probably a really valuable website. I know maybe you use that for some of your teaching classes or whatever, but I think I found that very cool to see. All right, and this is what I wrote and sold, and then this is how we made it sound like how we sold it, how we made it for the film.
And some of that even goes in. I also want to shout out my mixer Erdem, who mixed the music, and yet the some of the framework of the mock-ups would already have some production awareness in terms of what kinds of reverbs and approaches would happen sometimes. And even some of that gets into just approach to pitch. There are some really amazing recordings in the Max Roach thing, but there's a couple of them that have some pitchy things in it, and so it would be really, really funny to have older recordings with just capturing what they did, and then go to my super clean recording in a Brooklyn studio. Oh, and by the way, we fixed this tuning or whatever. And so there were definitely parts as a producer where, I'm incorporating that. And that some of that even went to the demos, which is to say, I use different sample libraries. A fake saxophone sound is a really awful thing. And I can't even remember which sample library I used right now, because I had a template that I built. I later used some of that same template for a short film called Last Ride, which is a award-winning short film about a bunch of Uber rides with infected people, shall we say, in LA. But the point being is I used this mock-up jazz quintet sound, but I used different sample libraries to arrive at that, and that even took some just how do I just not get this to sound awful, and
I think that's another thing I don't always think about as a composer, because again, I'm always just putting on notes for live performance. But with your film score stuff, you're also like the producer side of this, getting that final thing. So you're thinking reverb and tone color and all those other aspects. And I'm assuming then for Max Roach, what you just sort of talked about was then I need to match it to the sound of the 60s and 70s that Roach, that all these Roach tracks are things that I need to find a reverb that sounds like that as opposed to the other. That's a whole other additional aspect to this type of work, that I didn't think about. I mean, I produce albums, jazz albums and things like that where I put on that hat, but it's not something that I necessarily think about when I'm thinking, film composer. Oh, right. But you're also sound producer. Yeah,
you're responsible for whether or not I am on some films. I am the producer. Actually, on most films I've done, I'm the producer of the score too. But But so it is possible that a composer would have a different producer that's facilitating the vision of the composer in such a way. But ultimately, that's what you're responsible for. Is you're responsible for delivering a film score produced in synchronization to picture. That's what you're, and so even when I start to sketch on a film of any kind, whether that's a narrative film or a documentary or a horror film or whatever, I'm gonna, I really approach that early sketching process in two modes. So, one of them is notes on paper stuff, like themes. That might be me going to a piano or me humming stuff or whistling stuff or playing stuff on an instrument, I don't know that well, if that sound is kind of and the second part of the approach is already getting the sounds together. Because I need to start knowing what instruments are we talking about and how can I convey earlier on a proof of concept that gets the filmmaker and the film team on board, and that requires, lots of missteps, because even the piano only version wouldn't make sense necessarily. Wait a second. This is a blues film. Why are you playing, this piano theme this way, and that's even an interesting thing to think about. Even one of the more successful collaborative relationships, say John Williams and Spielberg. I mean, this supposedly the first time Williams played for Spielberg Jaws, he laughed because he's like, boom, dum, on a piano, like, dum, dum, and he laughed because not knowing what the intentions of the orchestration would be.
Right. Because Spielberg's not a composer or a sound guy. He can't translate that in his head like, say, we could.
So, these days with all the tools, it's kind of incumbent to have that baked in the first time. But there's can also be kind of demo love. And then there are, for some less adept composer orchestrators, you also tend to write to what the sample libraries make sound good.
Wow.
Which that includes idiomatic writing, of course. The more idiomatic you are, the sample library is going to sound better. But there's some things that sample libraries don't do very well. And when you're crunched against time, are you going to spend time, trying to get it to do a touch fourth harmonic, sliding to a whole thing, or, legato strings and other kinds of trills and things like that? Or are you just going to say, screw that, I'll do some other thing that the sample library is informing the composition in terms of what sounds better from a production point of view, in terms of getting a demo approved, as opposed to, is this truly activating all that a composer and orchestrator would use in their ideas of what they would hope to do versus what you just can do on a time. So most film composers tend to spend a lot of time on their template, and they have a single template that does all these things. I do have some that I've used as starting places, but generally my preference is to start from scratch on every film. It's like I would no more put no more than you would want to than a director would want a previous actor's performance in the film. You want the composer to approach it like it's a fresh thing, and so that's part of my approach.
Yeah, and I mean, and you've done a wide variety of different types of films, from documentaries to horror things, and stuff based on blues guys, jazz, all sorts of different things. Because of your chameleon ability, you can do all these different projects. So yeah, you couldn't put the same template that you're doing for a horror movie on a Deep South blues movie.
And even even part of the other deliverables on the dub, you're going to deliver some stems. Typically, I like to have just mixes, which is, this is the mix and here we go. And if you need stems, we'll have that conversation. But stems would be, separating into the main elements in the same way that a stem splitter would do now. But it's interesting to think about the things that are good about having a template is to have already the stems, the mixes, and the stem separators are not stem separators, but just stem outputs already built into the template. So that's the one thing where I've kind of caused myself more complication, is the fact that to work on a film with 40 cues and realize that because of the way I've set it up, I have to individually create every stem, as opposed to a film that's got that template baked in, whereby the outputs are easy and you can tell it to do it all at the same time. And so that's the grief that I would not suggest for younger folks, but that's a little
Right. So it's a bunch of extra work for you,
right.
but possibly if you become a big enough operation, you could pass it off to your sub composers and things like that.
I did give a shout out. I mean, I have never, I have assistants / interns through a program called New York Arts Program. But those are typically only in the spring and the fall. And there's a steep learning curve with them. And I've never had co-writers or never had I've had some help with some orchestration with some things. A little bit more based on style or as well as timelines. But typically I'm doing everything myself, but the assistants do a lot of both intel as well as organizational related tasks, which could involve everything from cue sheets to takedowns to doing research on a particular production technique, a particular notational technique. I mean, we were talking about the graphical stuff, and like I put some of my interns on that, just saying, hey, can you dig around and see who does this in different ways, and found a couple of links which expedited that process for my own discovery. But based on just knowing that it would be beneficial to these assistants as well as to me. And I put those all in a giant Google folder, and that body of knowledge goes on to the next batch of interns too.
Right.
And that's part of the teaching mentor vibe,
Right. And that's really cool that you do that. You're helping that next generation. Plus, you're getting your benefit. I was thinking too, like Hans Zimmer. You hire Hans Zimmer, but he's got dozens of other composers that work for him, and they write some of the stuff and he approves it, or he writes some stuff and he gives it to them to finish up. I think I remember hearing one story where he had too many other contracts going. They really wanted him for this one, but he was on for some contractor reason, he couldn't accept the job, but gave it to one of his other guys. But it sounds more like Hans Zimmer. There's thought that actually he did write it, but put it under this other guy's name because of contractual things, because he's got this pool of people that he works with to make his projects happen. But, realizing you're a one-stop shop type of setup.
Yeah. Hans Zimmer in Pirates of the Caribbean, which is essentially he was, booked for another film. But there's different kinds of opportunities. I mean, having met Ludwig Göransson in Park City, and of course Ryan Coogler, his main collaborator, when I met them in Park City, going back to Fruitvale Station, that would have been probably 2015 or something like that. I mean, that was a long time ago. And the other folks I've met in Park City is another whole thing. But point being, Ludwig, of course, has all kinds of experience, not only as a record producer, but also as a film scorer, as well as a songwriter, and can pull on all those things. But Hans wasn't able to work on some Nolan films, and that's why we get Ludwig for Tenet and for Oppenheimer. So that's, where one person has to say no, someone else can jump in and open things up that way. So, but yeah. I mean, there's definitely some other composers I'd love to work with, in terms of co-situation. It's interesting how the co-thing can kind of work out too, both in terms of just approach as well as production, as well as, what kinds of other material comes out of that. So there are definitely some composer teams, and definitely open to that. So it's not resistance, more opportunity and the right situation.
Right. Well, like our friend Chris Carter, right? He has a 4 composer team group that they're more like not always exactly co-composers either, but they get a project and maybe split up episodes between them, or work on projects somewhat together. So.
And that's also part of the the filmmaking process, and ideally you've got a learning curve and yet an opportunity to voice when things didn't go exactly right, and how to learn from that, and distribute the not only the work but also the back end equitably. But overall, with very few exceptions, most of the time films are a situation where you dive in and you go till it's done.
Yeah.
So I see some contracts, or at least proposed contracts, from younger film composers with the notion of a certain number of revisions. And my typical response to that, oh, that's cute. That's funny. That's so cute. Really? 2? That's all? Okay. All right. Well, good luck with that. Because ultimately you're going to do whatever it takes to make you're going to be in that moment of just trying to get it right. And as much as it can sting to do a bunch of revisions, that it's all opportunities for just doing stuff better and learning. And it's ultimately the filmmaker's film. So that's the other part too, is like you can have the notion, um, and so that's all part of the gig, for sure.
Awesome. Well, it's definitely been great catching up with you and learning all about your projects and some side of the insider of some of the work that you do. It's very good for me, very educational for me, because again, you do some things that I don't do. So I've really enjoyed learning about that.
Fantastic, and I'll definitely hit you back up with all things what you're doing too, in terms of the orchestra that you're working with, as well as notational things, boxes, and other ways to pull off the vector graphics, as well as things double read too, because like that's another whole.
Yeah, that's a beast.
Whether I'm conducting or teaching or doing a film score or whatever, it's keeping in the flow and creating and storytelling and sound, and that's what I do. That's what I.
Yeah, that's amazing.